So as I was thinking about this morning's talk and looking at the agenda for the past couple days, yesterday and today going forward, there's not much that hasn't been said or won't be said by the time you leave this conference about orphan diseases. And invariably, we're going to repeat things. I think that's the nature of the space. So I thought rather than give a sort of here's a summary of what I think critical elements are in the orphan disease space, I'm going to use this time to editorialize a bit. And our perspective, my perspective, has evolved. It's evolved by virtue, as Hans said. I had the privilege of joining Genzyme when it was quite small and watching, being part of it, growing to one of the largest biotech companies in the world, and now being acquired by Sanofi, so a large pharmaceutical company, and large is certainly a bit of an understatement. We went from a 10,000-person large biotech to being part of a 100,000, now 110,000 sized pharmaceutical company, and thinking about how does size impact, how does it matter, does it give you advantages, does it create disadvantages, does it change how you would think about being in the orphan disease space? And it's pretty early, so I'm no expert on large companies, but I'm beginning to get a feel and obviously watch them from the outside, now seeing it from the inside. So I thought from that perspective, I'd reflect a little bit on does size matter in the orphan disease space. And I thought, where do you want to start? And I'm going to start by the simple question of, if you think about patients, because at the end of the day, that's where it starts and ends, and how to help people put that part of this in perspective. And one analogy that I've used a number of times now, mostly internally, but I'll try it here, which is to say, as we try to understand what it means to be a patient in the rare disease space, just ask yourself, have you been a patient? Have somebody in your family been a patient? So, how many of us have been to the doctor? Think about that experience. So you go in to see your physician, and whether you're sick or not, and I've been healthy, and I go to the doctor as well as a physician, so I know the system, but I'm going to argue its experience is probably not so different for me. Your physician, asks how you're doing, a few questions, what your complaints are, and then they say, okay, take off your clothes and put on this gown, and I'll be back in a minute. So you take off your clothes, you put on that gown, and you sit on the examining table, and you notice the room is usually a little bit cold, and that gown is pretty liberal when they call it a gown, and trying to figure out do you put it on front or back, and it's and you're sitting and you're waiting for the physician or doctor to come back in, and then the question for you is how do you feel? Anybody want to venture? How do you feel? Vulnerable. Yeah. That's from my former Genzyme employee. But I can tell you, having talked about that example, which people get, and it's amazing. The response is vulnerable. We all feel vulnerable, and that I think is the starting point for healthcare. And healthcare is about this incredibly personal experience where there's nothing probably we value more than our health, and when we become ill, it's an extremely personal, threatening experience, and I think we could all say probably we'd give up pretty much most of what we had if we could, quote unquote, have our health. So then you go to the orphan disease space, and I only have about 6 slides here. They're mostly pictures, and this picture is Winter. Winter is, she's in her 30s, maybe 40. She's a mother of 2 younger children. Winter went to the physician one day because she was having some chest pain, and her physician, who was her OBGYN, said, wow, she was quite concerned, and she sent Winter to the cardiologist. The cardiologist looked at Winter and said, you know what, this is basically all in your head. You don't have heart disease. And following back and forth, arguments, multiple tests, they finally realized that she had in fact had a heart attack, that she had severe coronary artery disease, and that she fell in that small, incredibly rare disease group of familial hypercholesterolemia, so elevated cholesterol levels, which is one of the most common problems we see, but she didn't have the face of heart disease. She didn't look like a patient who should be having a heart attack. And she came and she told her story to Genzyme, and of course everybody in the room was pretty riveted as they listened to this mother of two young children talk about her odyssey going through the healthcare system and having an expert in heart disease tell her that she didn't have heart disease. So it's not like a cardiologist had never heard of, homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia, but the system and that cardiologist didn't recognize it. And as I listened to this woman who's just an unbelievable dynamo, and I just had one question. I said, were you angry? And she wasn't angry, but she had a right to be angry that the healthcare system had treated her so badly and had made her so vulnerable. So, one story. The little boy on the right, I don't know the little boy on the right, but again, just speaks to the fact that these rare genetic diseases, they have no face. Many diseases have no face. I mean, we all may look healthy, we may look sick, but that doesn't necessarily tell you what's wrong, and as a result, we may go unrecognized. Another quick story. Showed this picture last year at this meeting. We showed it many places, but for me, it's just a reminder again. Healthcare is personal, but it doesn't just affect you, it affects your family. And this is a X-linked rare genetic disease, Fabry disease. This is a family that gets together for their family reunion every year. They have about 100 members of the family who come. 40 plus members of that family have Fabry disease. And as you can see, looking at this picture, you see a number of boys in the front row. You see fewer males in the back row, and that's because males tend to have the more severe form and have an average age of survival in their 40s to 50s, and so they have not survived, or those who have survived have paid the price and have lived an incredibly difficult life, only to then die early. So again, ravages disease, and they have a right to be angry, and they certainly have a right to be angry. We make an enzyme replacement therapy for this disease, and we had the incredibly unfortunate occurrence where we were unable to supply them, and they had a right to be angry that we had failed them. And so again, recognizing the highly personal nature of healthcare and what people bring to that highly personal experience. So that's the rare disease end of the spectrum, and then you say, well, is this all about orphan diseases? Because orphan diseases are small, and arguably you can know people personally in this space. The communities are small, you can come together, but is it different for a larger disease? So we have our opportunity to enter into the field of multiple sclerosis. That's a larger disease. It's big business, $13 billion market, multiple sclerosis. Money changes how people think about diseases, and I think we as a community need to be pretty alert and attentive to how money is influencing how we think about things. So we have this space, highly lucrative, many companies competing, over 1 million patients worldwide, certainly who are in need of treatment. But is it different? And this picture, there's no picture of a patient's face here, but there's a picture of a cane. And this is Teresa's cane, and I heard Teresa's story. So Teresa is a 50-year-old grandmother. She's a nurse who developed multiple sclerosis, and she described, again, in this incredibly compelling story, just her progression, her progressive loss of function, her progressive inability to walk, and her cognitive decline, and beginning to get lost, trying to find her way home. And she had that monumental day where she went to her physician, and her physician said, you know what, it's not safe. You need a walker, you need some level of support. And she'd never seen herself that way, and so that was a transformative moment for her. I mean, envisioning, needing a cane were for old people. She wasn't old. She was picturing her granddaughter suddenly now seeing her walking around with a cane, and she goes to the store where she was told to go pick up her cane, and they show her all these canes that are for old people, orthopedic-looking canes, and she breaks into tears, and the woman in the store says, wait, why don't you go away, come back, in a couple hours, I think I have a solution for you. And she comes back, and, this is this cane, and it's covered with butterflies. And so that's my cane. And I can I can work with that. And so again, it's her story. She's one of, million plus individuals, but every one of those individuals has a story to tell. And what she's looking for is just the opportunity to tell that story, to share it. Companies that are willing to take the time to listen. So my summary of this part of it in terms of thinking about patients, large or small, does it matter? And the answer is it doesn't matter to the patient. They don't care how big a company you work for. They only care that hopefully whatever decisions you're making, whatever you're doing is in their best interest, and that you have the willingness to take the time to listen to their stories. And so for me, as I began to think about what defines success in this space, it's thinking about an organization with a soul. Now, I don't know if that resonates or not. Maybe that's not the right word, but I think it captures the element that you can read a lot of articles about what it takes to be successful in a certain space. You can have expertise in clinical trial development and dealing with many of the challenges. You can be an expert marketeer, but I would argue that success ties to a significant degree to that concept of organizationally, and it's not just individually. Everybody I think has the best intentions, but organizationally, do you have an organization that gets the importance of taking the time to listen to that story? So does size help? Can you do more? Does that increase the likelihood that you're going to develop a cure? I mean, this is the famous question, where does innovation come from? This is a article out of the Financial Times, but a well-described problem. We in the industry, we spend an unbelievable amount of money trying to develop new drugs, and the outcome, of course, is becoming more and more difficult. Fewer drugs are, quote-unquote, being developed. Fewer truly new, innovative drugs are being developed despite massive amounts of money. And I think for me, the short conclusion here is that, of course, size doesn't matter. You can't, spending $5 billion a year in an R&D program doesn't guarantee you're going to develop a drug. So again, it's how do you think about interacting with the community? And there's all kinds of challenges that are part of the R&D developmental innovative challenge, if you will, and I know you've been talking about them, you'll talk about them again. Rarity itself has enormous challenges, not the most of which is you start out with the question of, who and where are these patients? Even when you find enough to do a trial, those trials tend to be small, 50 to 100 patients perhaps in the spaces that we work with. And the biggest challenge in any development program when you want to ask the question is, can you find a homogeneous population? Not just, can you find the patients, but are they homogeneous enough that when you ask a question and you introduce your variable, my drug versus no drug, can you answer the question of did it work or not? And heterogeneity is just an amazing part of this challenge, and how we deal with heterogeneity and how we help health authorities and market access parts of this equation understand that we will not be able to answer questions the way you can answer questions in a very large disease footprint. And the heterogeneity, again, in the rare disease space, my takeaway from this is it's not what you know, of course, it's what you don't know. And we know so little. And I put up this slide just as a reminder. We did, again, going back to Fabry disease, we studied Fabry disease, and again, very challenging developmental program. But if I took one thing away from that, we underestimated the point at which this disease became severe. And this is a kidney biopsy from a 19-year-old Fabry patient who had relatively normal renal function. So kidneys, based on our best clinical measure, look normal. You do a biopsy, and of course this is by no means a normal kidney and is filled with fibrosis, and that's an irreversible complication. And so, again, never underestimating the extent to which we may not fully understand the problem, again, I think is the key. And that's not about size, that's about a way of thinking that will allow us to be successful. And it also highlights the fact that you can get a drug approved, but in our space, that's just the beginning, and it's not the end game. And it should just be the beginning, because if we're going to get health authorities to work with us and to enable earlier access to therapies, it's with the understanding that we're going to continue to work to understand how better to use those therapies, how to understand the heterogeneity within the population, how to understand the difference between adults and kids, etc. So it's the beginning, not the end. So I'm just going to finish with a couple thoughts about the business model. Put this up to be provocative, but I think that is, if you ask me what I'm concerned about in terms of the orphan disease space, I am concerned that we get this backwards. And if the orphan disease space suddenly becomes rare diseases, a place where people think that it's an easy place to make money, this bubble, and if it is a bubble, like all bubbles, it will collapse. And healthcare in general, and again, that was where I started, it's not even just about the rare genetic disease space, but I think as an industry, if we put making money in front of making patients better, the system will appropriately and correctly push back, and it'll push back in a way that will make further innovation even more difficult, if not impossible. There's been a lot of attention around orphan disease legislation and how important orphan disease legislation was in terms of fueling innovation and attracting people to the space. And if you think about orphan disease legislation, which is a fantastic policy step, it gives you some protection, 7 to 10 years. It gives you some tax breaks, all of which, of course, are interesting. But I will argue that the absolute number one driver for interest in this space is the business model. Because if there is no sustainable business model that allows you, the investor, to have some confidence that you have an ability to get your return back, then you're not going to invest. And the major driver for the progress that has been made in the orphan disease space today is the fact that there is a business model. Now, that business model is not a guarantee. In fact, it's a business model which in the beginning was under the radar screen, and now it's a business model that's on the radar screen, and increasingly healthcare authorities are asking the question, can we afford this? And the key part of that business model is that pricing is a function of rarity, and the rarer the disease, it is necessary that in fact those therapies, assuming that they make a meaningful clinical difference, and this is our obligation, we have to demonstrate a meaningful clinical difference, that they will cost more, but not infinitely more. And how we as an industry think about pushing that model is a really important question. There's no right answer, and every disease is by definition different, but it's something that I think we need to think about incredibly carefully. The opportunity in this space is incredible, and the fact that we have more and more people coming in is great. There is a real opportunity to make an enormous difference. I heard yesterday there was some debate around, the 7,000, orphan diseases with, only a small number having treatments, and is that the right number? Because it creates a fear on the part of healthcare systems, perhaps, who think there's going to be this tsunami of new indications that are going to cost and break the system. And the reality, of course, is that it's hard. Developing a therapy is incredibly hard. It's getting harder. And so the probability there'll be a tsunami is zero. On the other hand, the opportunity to develop cures or develop therapies that dramatically improve lives with this amount of interest and this amount of potential investment and attention in this space is enormous. But I would hope that we don't come in and we chase the few places where a business model is established, because again, we're not really creating value. Where the healthcare system will come to truly appreciate what this industry can do is when we continue to solve new problems and to bring innovative new solutions for therapies that make a difference. And so I'll leave you with this picture of Winter. We're making a drug for hypercholesterolemia. I have no idea whether Winter will ever use our drug, whether it'll be the right drug for her. But I do know one thing, which is Winter, working with one individual at Genzyme in the United States, has already radically transformed what the world looks like for familial hypercholesterolemia, and we've helped enable that, working in partnership with Winter, and that is already a pretty significant contribution. So with that, I'll stop, take any questions that people have, and thank you.
questions indeed. I see one in the back there already. Please introduce yourself as well.
Okay. Gregory Tutton. I'm here as a guest of Czech Orphan. One question, but two parts to the question. Within the context of a new business model, we're hearing a lot about collaboration. What do you see as the extent to which exclusivity and IP limit the ability to collaborate? Or within the context of a new business model, how do you see IP, intellectual property, changing to enable collaboration, to reduce time, to increase effectiveness, to reduce cost for clinical trials and drug delivery?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I think IP, not surprisingly, is incredibly important. And there's a couple of pieces here that will shut off money. And if we put at risk the concept of IP, I think that will shut off money, and that would be devastating to the future of this industry. I don't think that IP is the issue in terms of collaboration. That's where I think that we, as a field, need to understand, as I think we do, but perhaps we underestimate, the challenge of development. So the insular approach that the industry has taken historically is less likely to lead to the best possible outcome than a more open-minded approach that says, I may not have all the answers internally, and one of the most obvious points of collaboration, which I know has been discussed, and there's some people here in the audience who are heavily vested in this, is that collaboration with the patient community. The idea that we can develop a therapy without taking the time to listen to the stories of the patients who are living with that disease, with working with the organizations that represent that disease, who have begun to do work in that disease in terms of creating the awareness, perhaps having developed the registries. I mean, those are the points of collaboration where I think real incremental value is created. Companies working together and thinking about where mutually compatible points of collaboration can happen without letting IP be a huge barrier, again, I think is incredibly important. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but that's how partnership and collaboration is important.
Another question in front of you.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Philippe Montaigne, head of R&D in GSK Rare Diseases. It may be too early for you to comment, but maybe you can already give us some ideas on how the integration within a big company will impact your business model, as you were talking about business model.
Yeah. So I go back to this pretty soft concept of organizational soul. If people ask me, what is the thing that's been most impactful in this merger, it's the sheer concept of size. I mean, you can look at 100,000 on a piece of paper and you have a certain concept of it, but to actually live it and feel it is a different concept. Decision making, bureaucracy, all the things that are necessary to allow a larger company to be able to function are new elements in the world that we live in. But my answer, I think, is that there's a strong desire on the part of Sanofi, as an example, to preserve and understand first and preserve the elements which allow Genzyme to be successful and increasingly will allow Sanofi to be successful here. So they will keep us relatively autonomous. We will run, but they will help us be better. I think there's a strong belief, and certainly one I subscribe to, is that we can help Sanofi be better.
Any other questions?
Remco de Vries, Dutch Steering Committee, Orphan Drugs. You showed a picture on things like attrition rate and that things are not going well. We also discussed it yesterday. What kind of solutions is, as you are now part of Big Pharma, what kind of solutions is Big Pharma thinking of increasing the attrition rate or lowering the attrition rate? Well, pardon my English, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is the age-old problem. So if there was an easy solution, of course, lots of smart people out there would have been figured out. But the one conclusion, I can't tell you how necessarily you're going to increase the rate, but I'm quite confident we know what hasn't worked so well. And the idea that, again, that you can close your doors and spend $5 billion and develop a drug, makes no sense to me. I mean, the richness of our small and shrinking global community and its ability to solve problems and how we as an industry want to participate in that global community, I think, is where the answer lies. So it's increasingly looking outward as opposed to inward. I think that's the answer.
Maybe I can also give a suggestion, if that's okay.
Yeah, great.
The one thing that I experience navigating between different stakeholders is this enormous distrust of pharma. That doesn't mean that I distrust the pharma, it's what I experience, especially with healthcare. You already mentioned that healthcare reimbursement agencies, healthcare professionals as well. So that sounds to me more like a cultural. Does that affect your position as Genzyme, which I always saw as a very good open company? Do people on the outside look differently at Genzyme, a Sanofi company, than they did before the takeover of Sanofi?
Yeah, it's a concern. So I think we all recognize how the biopharmaceutical industry is viewed, and in many cases I think we deserved that reputation, so I worry about that. And I worry about being painted with one brush. The short answer to your question is a personal one, which is if this changes, I won't work here. And I think Sanofi put me into this role because they didn't want it to change. So I think that was pretty clear in the discussions we had. So we'll see. I mean, there's some realities. As I said, you go back to these challenges of size and all of these conversations, healthcare authorities, I mean, the many hundreds, thousands of conversations are going to be had. There's a certain uniqueness to each conversation, but I'll go maybe the place to close here because I think we're out of time is people want to trust. Right? I mean, this is healthcare. We're not selling washing machines here. We're selling drugs that make a difference for people's lives. They want to trust. And we as an industry, I think, just need to respect that.